Hi, my name is Andries Fourie. I work at SRK Consulting. I've been employed here since 2012. I'm a senior technologist in disaster management, and I've more than 21 years experience in disaster management. I've worked at municipalities, and prior to actually working at the SRK, I was involved in disaster management actively in those places. I've dealt during my career with various threats and emergencies and disasters, including floods, fires, xenophobia, a lot of different things that I actually encountered in my career. And I've been employed at SRK since 2012, and from here I'm actually doing a lot of disaster management for a lot of different municipalities now. SRK Consulting is a consulting engineering company that consults on natural and resource engineering solutions. We in 22 countries, on 6 continents. We have more than 50 offices, and we consult on a range of things that we have solutions for our clients. A disaster is either a widespread or a localized event that threatens to cause damage, death, or serious injury to a community or people. Okay, and the crux of it is actually of a magnitude that exceeds their ability to actually cope with this using only their own resources. And that's the defining point of what a disaster is. It actually exceeds their resources. Disaster management is all the efforts, either proactive efforts, in other words, aimed at reducing or minimizing vulnerability or risks, reactive measures, in other words, preparing to be ready for, and also post-disaster, actually building up afterwards. So all of these efforts combined is actually disaster management. If you look at engineers, healthy engineering practices actually reduces disaster risk. So a project that is well done, that is well managed, and is actually well designed, ultimately reduces disaster risk. But the opposite is also true. So if you have a badly managed project that goes wrong, it actually increases disaster risk, because ultimately you put people at risk. For example, people that actually design stormwater management systems. If we do a stormwater management system wrongly and it goes wrong, we actually put people at risk by doing it. I've been on sites where stormwater management systems, as an example, popped off manhole covers and all things like that, because it was actually exceeding the ability. Also, in all reasonability, you have to say that they have to have a design. They designed for a 50-year or 25-year event. So that, in that sense, there is like a cap on what they can design for. But obviously, if there was a design flaw in the beginning, if calculations was not done correctly, it immediately causes a problem, and it immediately puts people at risk. There's Act 57 of 2002, which is the Disaster Management Act. That's basically the biggest set of rules. This is what governs what should happen in disaster management. Then with that, there's the Disaster Management Framework. The Disaster Management Framework is an annexure to the Act that actually tells you how it should be done. Then there's also a set of regulations, specifically with regards to volunteers in that in disaster management. Then there's another piece of it, and that is they actually at the moment revising the Disaster Management Act. So there's a Disaster Management Amendment Act coming out. in which they are addressing some of the problems that have been identified over the years in the Act now. Look, I don't know of all of them, but the ones that I know of is UNISA has a degree in disaster management, the University of the Free State has a degree in disaster management, and Potchefstroom has a degree in disaster management that you can obtain at this point in time. And there's no real professional registration like for engineers in disaster management. The highest registration that you can get is with the Disaster Management Institute, which is a grad member within the Disaster Management Institute. And it's not comparable, because the thing is, what I found was is that there's a lot of guys walking around outside that are pure academics,
yes,
okay, and they don't have relevant experience, or were like me actually in a disaster management position and actually have real world experience in it. So they approach it from a pure academic point of view. So I think it's really important that a person should have experience combined with academic qualifications to actually do this. So it is an area that is actually lacking. According to the framework, there's 3 levels in disaster management plans. A level 1 plan is a very basic plan. It's like an entry-level plan. It actually just gives you a stipulation of your institutional arrangements that you have to put in place. So that's a very basic plan, and it's a starting point. A level 2 plan is a little bit more advanced. It was actually designed in such a way that it's like a building block that you actually build up to. So a level 2 plan would have a disaster management plan, but then it will have, attached to that, it will have a disaster risk assessment. It will have a disaster management framework, which is like an institutional layout of it. Then it will have some contingency plans, and that basically constitutes a level 2 plan. A level 3 plan is even more advanced. It has more institutional arrangements, more commitments. It's got certain goals that you have to reach in this. It is actually a little bit of a bone of contention at this point in time. We had people, the Institute for Disaster Management is the MISA. There was actually people talking on this specific subject at the MISA a while ago, and the fact is that it's a bit of a grey area. If you say I have a level 2 plan, the framework is a little bit vague, and now it actually allows for a gap where people can argue and say, is this truly a level 2 plan? So that makes the work also a little bit tougher. The level 3 plans, I must say, there's not a whole lot of them in the country at this point in time, because of the fact that people get into an argument rather than actually get to that. So that's a little bit of a negative thing, but it's hopefully something that will be addressed now in the Amendment Act, because when they bring out the Amendment Act, they're going to have to revise the framework as well, and hopefully it will have more detail. There's a couple of role players that do very good jobs with that. Look, I can only comment on the ones that during my work where I encountered these plans and actually saw them.
Yes.
I know City of Cape Town has a very nice one. I've also encountered one, and I'm actually busy with the one for eThekwini at this point in time. It's really hard to say. I can't really say one of them is better than the others. You see, the thing is, I think an academic person tries to put a disaster management into a certain mold, and that's what I often find, is because they don't realize what is actually happening on ground level. What is it like to actually work in a municipality? What are the challenges to actually work in a municipality? So I think those are the serious problems that they're actually experiencing there is the fact that they don't have the real experience to actually deal with this, and that they try and put it into this academic mold that they come out of. When you look at the Disaster Management Act, okay, First of all, it starts off with your national responsibilities, then your provincial responsibilities, and then your municipal responsibilities. Your municipal responsibilities vests with district municipalities and metropolitan municipalities. So they're the ones that's supposed to have a disaster management plan in place. Your locals under a district is supposed to each have a disaster management plan in place before that district is actually able to see itself as a level 2, for example. Now, in that sense, it's actually easier for a metro to accomplish this because they've got only themselves to account to, where on a district level, and this is often difficult because it's like a consultative process that they have to go through with the local municipalities in their area to actually obtain these plans in their area. So it is a bit of it's a difficult thing, and there's a lot of interaction between the different municipalities, and they actually have to know each other in this whole process. Well, it starts basically with a introductory meeting where we actually identify data custodians. Then we go through a data gathering process. The data gathering is pivotal to this whole process because we have to base the disaster risk assessment on the data that we receive. We can't go and create data for the actual disaster risk assessment. So we gather the data, we log all the data that we receive, we analyze the data, we actually go through it and identify gaps. And once we identify gaps, we have to go back to them and actually address those points. Once we've done that, we actually do like a social vulnerability study. In a social vulnerability study, we take the census data, access to different services and all of that, put it into a model, and once we run this, we can actually get an idea of the social structure in those areas and how vulnerable the people in those areas themselves are. Once we've done that, we actually go into a community consultation phase, where we actually consult the people on ward level. We talk to them on disaster management, guide them actually on what disaster management is, give them some sort of an explanation on it. And once we've done that, we actually divide them like usually into groups and that, and we've got like a whole questionnaire that group leaders actually guide the people through, fill in all the information that we have, and we actually also do a session then where we actually put all of their risks, the identifiable risks or tangible risks, onto a map. And once we have that, we then have enough information to actually collate this all, put it into a model. We run this model, and then we actually come up with actual disaster risk. Now, if you look at disaster risk is your hazard and vulnerability, and it's actually a mathematical equation over your resilience. Your resilience is your capacity of your community and of the municipality and the government institutions in that area. So that gives you an idea of what this model does, because we actually work it out. We end up with a mathematical figure, and that gives, so we quantify it. We quantify the risk. So that's where we end up with that thing. So that's the one facet of it. The other facet is we actually take this and we take this, all of this, the resources, the vulnerabilities, the hazards, and we put it into GIS. We overlay all of this together. Once we have it all overlaid, once we have it all overlaid, we can actually identify areas where there are gaps in resources, where there is a lot of resources, where there's a lot of vulnerability. So we actually do that on a color scale so that it's visually, you can visually see it on a map. Yes. And we actually put it out so that the people can look at it. So this, together with the model, then gives us the results for the risk assessment. And obviously we do this on a scale where you have to realize that a lot of these municipalities have a limited budget. So in other words, we have to fit in the work that we do. The amount of hours that you can spend on this is unlimited. So we have to basically draw the line somewhere and make sure that we actually do it within the basis of what they are asking for. And also within the time spans, because that's often also a problem. to use a practical example, two of the risk assessments that I've done now, the one was for Amatole, which is up and around East London, which is an area that is really quite rural. It's the old Transkei and Ciskei. There's not a whole lot of development in this area. So they're not reliant on infrastructure a lot.
Yes.
In contrast with that, I did eThekwini, which is this developed area that has most of the people are living in built-up houses. They've got access to formal toilets. They've got formal garbage removal and all of that. So this is the contrast between the two. Now, to answer your question on how does it affect the risk, if you look at eThekwini now, for example, they are a lot more vulnerable to critical systems failure. So in other words, for service delivery failure, they're a lot more vulnerable to that, where Amatole is actually less vulnerable to that because they don't have access to the services. So that is the one thing. The second thing is we, as far as possible, try and map these different pieces of infrastructure and try and lay it out so that we can see what the vulnerability is as far as that is concerned. But unfortunately, at this point in time, also due to the restraints often, we can't go into such detail where we actually look at the individual systems and say, listen, this one is actually more vulnerable because it's older and it's badly maintained and all of that. It's a difficult situation.
Yes.
In that sense. You can obviously go into a specific study in that, but you see the thing is when we get to a point like that, for example with eThekwini now, it is identified as one of their major risks, as an example.
Right.
So we would actually say to them, this is something that you have to do a further study on. Okay, so it's an area of specific study, and obviously we're going to need people that are specifically qualified in that area.
Yes.
The most important thing is to know where his infrastructure is.
Yes.
It sounds funny, but that's one of the most basic things. You know, the thing is when you get to the bigger municipalities, you will find that they've got a proper GIS department and they've actually defined where their resources are. But in your smaller municipalities, you end up with the guy taking out a huge map and saying, here it is. And you know, the thing is to actually go and digitize that now for us in a process like this, it's actually not feasible.
Yes.
So that I would say is one of the most important things. The second thing is I think they have to realize the importance of what they are doing and how important it is to actually maintain what they are busy with, because they can actually exponentially increase disaster risk by not maintaining what is in their municipality. I think one of the things that you often see is that disaster management is placed wrongly. In other words, a disaster management officer would be low on the hierarchy and he actually has to deal with a department head that is a lot higher than him in the hierarchy, and he now has to ask certain questions and ask this guy to give him certain deliverables, and he's seen as a subordinate. So that creates a challenge. The other fact is, I think by doing that, they're actually diminishing it and not giving the importance that it should actually receive within the municipality. The second thing is obviously the funding, which is a huge challenge. I think it's harder to actually see afterwards that this was necessary to actually account for the funding that you want to put into this now. So that also creates a bit of a challenge there. The final report that we would give in, okay, and bearing in mind this is now a disaster management plan, is like a policy statement. It's a policy statement for the municipality that contains their policy on disaster management. So it has their human resources, it has their equipment that they can use, it has their facilities that they have available, it has a a basic plan to reduce disaster risks on some of their key risks in there. It has a disaster risk assessment that shows their key risks in the area. Except for that, it should also contain the disaster management framework, and all of this combined would then be their disaster management plan. The important thing is they need to see this as a process. So part of this is a statement where they actually say, okay, we're going to review this on a regular basis. This is a process of actually building up. So in other words, we need to build on what we do not have. If there's certain things, I mean, there's a whole list of things that we actually go through with them, but if there's certain things that are not in place, we write it into the plan and we ask them they should commit to actually doing this. So when they get to a point where they actually have to review this, they have to go through that plan and they have to make sure that what is it that we do not have in place yet, and they actually have to do that. There's also from the National Disaster Management Centre, there's a tool that they actually go through, and there's a set of questions that they answer. Basic things like they have to appoint a head of the centre. They have to appoint the personnel that are required for all of this. They have to have funding in place. So all of that is contained in this document, and if these things are outstanding, they have to address these points one by one and make sure that they have them in place. The fact of the matter is I think a lot of plans end up as something on a shelf in somebody's office. It's a tick mark, that's something that was needed and that's sitting there. They have to use it. They have to take that disaster risk assessment and go through this and realize what is our major risks, what are the contributing factors, what am I going to do to reduce this. If they don't use it, it becomes a useless piece of paper that's sitting on somebody's shelf.
What is the Disaster Management Institute, its role, and what does it offer its members?
The Disaster Management Institute is basically a group of all the disaster management people that are involved in the country where you can actually join, and we've got a professional conference every year where they actually have people that speak on different things. It is supposed to play a role as a regulatory body in this to make sure that people are actually who they say they are, to make sure that the qualification and the registration and all of that is promoted. It's been in existence for a couple of years. The thing is, what happens is a lot of people talk on a lot of difficult subjects or obstacles that people are encountering on a daily basis. So yes, it definitely is. And I must say there is a lot of people from municipalities that are not actually disaster management professionals, but like councillors that are responsible for a specific portfolio that actually attend these conferences. So definitely. Oh, I definitely think an engineer can actually realize the importance of what he's doing, first of all, and to actually understand the link between disasters and development and how you can actually reduce the risk through proper engineering. The most important thing I would say is the GIS. As I said, we get all the data and we actually overlay it. So what we do is we take the vulnerabilities, we take the resilience, which is all the strengths out of the community and the municipality. For example, we also map on their police stations, we map on their fire stations or emergency services, hospitals, clinics, all of that gets mapped onto this. So that is seen as resilience. Once we have all of that combined, we actually take all of the vulnerability from the people and we actually overlay that with them, and we see where the gaps are. So that's one of the most important tools that we use, and it's the GIS, and it gives a wonderful picture that you can visually see how to actually identify where your vulnerabilities is. The second thing is we've got a dynamic model that we put all the data into. And obviously it has to be dynamic because the data varies so much from the different municipalities that we get. So we put in all this different data in this, and like I said earlier, it actually gives us an output where we actually end up with a numerical value for the risk. So it's not the point where the resources can't cope,
Yes.
but it gives them a clear indication and tells them this is the ones that you need to look at. This is the ones where your resources are the least, because the one thing you must remember, part of this whole equation is we look at the resources that they have available. If they don't have enough resources, the risk value is immediately going to be higher. A disaster management center is a building or a facility where they actually manage the disaster management from in this area. Now there's a lot of different thinking about this. Some people see it as an actual call center where they actually answer calls and where they actually have personnel on duty full time. Other people see it as a place where it's actually an empty building and they just want to put in people when they need it. But the fact of the matter is, according to the Act, a local disaster management centre needs to act as a conduit and a repository of information. So in other words, they have to have like a data management system where they actually collate data on disasters in their area and have information available, such as their resources and all of that available. They should have a facility where they can run a joint operations centre. What this means is all your key role players should come actually together in one place when there's a major incident or a situation that they need to handle, so that you have your decision makers available in one spot, that these people can actually sit inside there and make active decisions inside and actually communicate it out. So a communication system is also part of this whole system. Inside there, they should be able to actually disseminate information, because also that's also part of this. Typically in a disaster situation, you will have a forward command, what they call a venue operations center or VOC. And what they then do is they actually on the scene, they have a bunch of people that actually take decisions on the scene, and they actually command the scene, and they then feed back to the JOC, and they run it inside there. So there's a lot of functions inside a disaster management center, but the thing is, it also has to look at the proactive side of it. And this is the most important thing, because I think to actually avoid it is more important than to actually react. So the fact of the matter is, all the reactive or the anything that happens before a disaster occurs, all the actions that reduce the vulnerability, that look at actually increasing the resilience and all of that, should then be based in this disaster management center, and they should keep records of what they are doing, because ultimately what it boils down to is the fact that when you actually get to a disaster situation, people are going to ask, what have you done? And that is the most important thing, because what happens now is you have to have proof of everything that you have done, and that is the role of a disaster management center. I can't fully say we actually ever accomplished that, because the problem is there's usually such a lot of red tape involved in this. An example of this is where I used to work at the West Rand District Municipality. We had an area called Kutsong on the other side of Carltonville. It's got a very real threat of dolomite. Now, I don't know what happened in the meantime now, but we actually had to move that entire township because it was located in a very, very dangerous area. I don't know if they managed it in the meantime, but the fact of the matter is that it was quite frustrating, because that was something that needed to be accomplished, which never was. And for me, that's something that I left behind when I left the municipality in a certain sense. So that's a tough one. You see, the thing is, it's not easy to actually do that, because the problem is you sit in situations where there is a lot of influences involved in this. So In smaller scale, yes, we for example moved people out of flood lines and things like that, but it's maybe not of a magnitude of a disaster where we were actually able to do that, but in continuously doing that, we moved them out of, for example, dangerous areas, yes. I was actually reading on this, and I think it's a big scale thing because the amount of people involved in this, and I think it's a huge thing. The ideal in situations like this would have been to actually manage it to such an extent that it actually never happened, but unfortunately in real life it's not possible. So I think if what I was reading is that there's like more than 30 fire stations involved in this, so there's a huge amount of people working on fire, and all of these guys are involved in this whole process. I think they are doing a good job. It's a difficult situation. I think where they are now is they're actually sitting at the point where the manpower that's involved in this have been working for such a long time. They're actually getting to a point where they actually have to manage that so they don't work out or burn out their human resources. It is a difficult situation. I think Cape Town has a lot of resources that they are piling into this. So I think they are handling it well. It's obviously not an easy situation to handle. That's basically where they are at, but I think it's a difficult situation. They also, look, there's three elements, and maybe I should just mention this. It's either the vulnerability or the hazard can be removed or the capacity can be increased. So that's how you actually reduce disaster risk. So when I'm looking at this now, it's a natural environment, it's the big fynbos and everything in the Cape Town, so you can't go and remove this now. So the vulnerability, there's not really anything that you can do about it. The capacity seems to be adequate. The only other thing that they can add in long term, and I think they already started with this and they did that, was actually awareness programs where they actually teach people about the threats of it. So that is the only possible things that they can do about it. So I must say, I think it's a huge thing, and they're managing it well. Disaster management is definitely growing. I can see that the profession in itself is actually growing. A lot more people are actually getting qualifications in it. We're getting a lot more demand. I must say, at the beginning of this year, we've been enormously busy because we got a lot of more projects. Things that I see is that funding is a huge problem in disaster management, and it's something tough to actually account for because it's not something tangible. If it's going well, people don't see the value of it, but when something goes seriously wrong, then people see the value in it. But disaster management as a profession is definitely growing in South Africa, and the thing is, if disaster management is well done, it can save a lot of lives, but if disaster management is not well done, it can cost a lot of lives. Cross-border into neighboring countries. I personally worked on the disaster risk reduction strategy for Botswana. We wrote it for them a while ago, so there's definitely in neighboring countries, there's definitely something happening. So Botswana has a central disaster management office, and they are definitely doing something about it. I know I was recently looking at the one in Namibia. Namibia actually, there was a lot of correlation between the Act and our Act. I personally think they used our Act as the model, and they actually did that from our Act. So I must say they're also well on their way. It's already an Act, and I think they've got central offices and appointed people, so they're definitely already working. I know Mozambique has a risk reduction strategy. I can't comment on the quality of it, but I know they also have it in place. So for the neighboring countries, that's basically where my knowledge ends, but there is definitely in the neighboring countries, and it is happening. And it's also obviously a threat to us in South Africa if the neighboring countries are not well equipped, especially Mozambique, that is subject to such a lot of floods and harsh weather as well. When we start off with the disaster management plan, we have to talk to the major stakeholders, which is obviously the disaster management department themselves. We talk to the engineering department, we talk to the traffic or the public safety, we talk to fire services, emergency services, ambulance services. All of those stakeholders we usually bring together in a room, and we actually run through them also with a presentation. We show them what disaster management is, what it's all about, and then we get them to fill in a set of questions, and we actually get a feel and an assessment for what their capacity is.
Right. How long would that process take?
Well, the preparation for the process is usually longer than the process itself, but usually in most municipalities we can actually complete that process within a day. But what then happens is we actually identify key stakeholders out of this, and we actually have one-on-one interviews with those key stakeholders and actually get more information specifically to the project from those stakeholders as well. The disaster management legislation in South Africa is based on the IOGO framework, which is an international statement of what disaster management should be. So we fully in line with what international best practices and all of that is. Plus, all the plans that we do is always has to be in line with international best practices.